There are many shows dedicated to Magic the Gathering strategies, decks, and formats. But unlike all of them, this channel is about discussing an individual card, an isolated card, an unrelated card. This is an Magic card. Hello there, netizens, and welcome to the 8th installment of my Slapdash YouTube channel, and Magic Card. My silly pseudonym is Dusty Cupboards, and as always, I'm about to spend a significant portion of my fleeting life exhaustively discussing a random Magic card for your sick entertainment. Before all of that hogwash, though, let's examine some of the posted statements from my enthusiastic and extremely smart fans. Hermie Monk appreciated the fact that I turned Spinal Embrace into a metaphor for online friendships, and I do appreciate the admiration, but unfortunately everything I talk about in these videos is 100% literal, so any deeper meaning you draw from it is completely on you, buddy. Luca bemoans that my videos interfere with them getting work done. I'm sorry, Luca. In the future, let me know when you have a day off, and I'll post all of my videos on that one day. One viewer alerted me to the presence of a Talara's Bane theme deck, which user Flyerbeast posted over on the website AetherHub. I don't know a lot about Vintage, the format this deck was constructed for, or pretty much anything else for that matter, but just looking at the cards featured here, it seems like a real winner. And with that out of the way, we can electric slide on over to the main topic for this video, one of the most sought after cards in the history of Magic the Gathering. Less than 24 hours after posting the last video, I'm back on the Gatherer, so I guess some habits die hard. And we're gonna get another random card. And this is that card. Near-Death Experience. Never played with this card before. It's big. It's extremely white. This card is great. At the beginning of your upkeep, I'm not going to read it. If I read it, I'll spoil the rest of the video. I'm just going to ramble on. I'm going to cut. This is going to be the shortest Gatherer section yet. This is it. I'm done talking. 15 minutes ahead of us where I can talk a lot. I don't need to say a whole bunch now. This is not the part of the video where I talk. This is the part of the video where I get a random card. The rest of the video is the part of the video where I talk. And also, the whole video. The whole video is the part where I talk. But this is the part where I talk the least. And then we move on. There's going to be a whoosh noise. Whoosh. And then we'll move on. Near-Death Experience is a 5-mana rare white enchantment from Rise of the Eldrazi, the 52nd expansion in the potentially millennium-spanning card game Magic the Gathering. Rise of the Eldrazi, or ROE, or sometimes just called Rise, was the third set in Zendikar block. As a commenter, IRL Fine Gaming, previously pointed out in one of my previous videos Zendikar block was a bit of an odd duck in that it both started and concluded with a big set, with a little set in between. This unorthodox block structure was also seen in the Grandfather Paradox riddled Khans block, which makes sense because if you go back in time during the middle of the block, then the beginning of the block will also be the end of the block. Someday, when I review every single card from Khans block, I'll explain how some of that Dragon Corpse time travel stuff happened. Zendikar block had two big ducks surrounding a little duck, because Rise of the Eldrazi is more of a departure into new territory than a continuation of Zendikar and Worldwake. I've mentioned one of these interdimensional spaghetti monsters before when we looked at a very spooktacular straw man, but in this video we'll be talking about a lot more of them, specifically 2 more of them, which is 200% more of them. The codenames for Zendikar block were Live Long and Prosper, which is a reference to the Vulcan salute from Star Trek. Star Trek is good. It's a bit odd that Rise of the Eldrazi was called Prosper because it is a set filled with unimaginable death and destruction, but I guess maybe it was the Eldrazi who were the prosperous ones. This prosperity was unleashed on April 23rd, 2010, the 5-year anniversary of the first ever YouTube video called Me at the Zoo, which confusingly doesn't feature me at the zoo at all, but some other guy. I have a sneaking suspicion that if I posted a video of me at the zoo, it wouldn't get 136 million views. It probably wouldn't even get more than 10 million views. The video is pretty underwhelming too, although in the background you can see some very silent and completely naked Loxodon crawling around on all fours. Maybe it's laundry day and one of them had dropped a contact lens. April 23rd is also Independence Day for the mock micronation of the Conch Republic. This joke country has a pretty decent flag, but is otherwise pretty uninteresting if you have even a passing familiarity with the long and varied history of micronations. Micronations are usually founded for political reasons, symbolic reasons, as an intentional bid to drum up tourism, or just because people are bored. People do lots of stupid things out of boredom, right? I'm gonna go on the record here and say that when people found micronations to bring attention to their historical lands being stolen, or the erasure of their indigenous cultures, or other forms of abuse at the hands of morally reprehensible governments, then that's fine, and I give them a blanket pass. When this sort of thing is to make a more nebulous statement, or as part of an art piece, or as a lark, or as a violent coup, then it can be a bit more cringy. And when it's done as a cynical ploy to sell merchandise, then it's just super gross. Regardless of motivation though, you've gotta have a good flag. The Conch Republic flag is pretty good, although a bit dated. I could easily see them doing a modern rebranding and losing all of the charm the current flag has. Kingdom of Humanity, Arakan Empire, Austenasia, Uzupis, Baschesne, New Atlantis, Frestonia, and Msimbati. Please step up your flag game. In precise vexillological terms, your flag designs suck. The flag of the Kingdom of Lovely just looks like a Valvoline ad. The flag of the gay and lesbian Kingdom of the Coral Sea Island is simply the gay pride flag, which is kind of low effort, but it does get the point across, so I think it's actually a solid choice. Waveland has a flag which pulls me in multiple directions. The whale is pretty cute, and even aside from the Gay Pride Association, rainbows are always boss as heck. The textural lines applied to the black rock behind the whale are a bit messy though, and you can clearly see the inner boundary line from when they used the magic wand tool to select and fill the rock shape in black. It's amateurish, in kind of a Steve Zissou way, which is good, but also amateurish in kind of a Napoleon Dynamite way, which is less good. The plane of Zendikar is all about exploring new lands, but as far as I know, it doesn't really have any flags, just a boat ton of floating geometry. Hedrons are a big part of the look and iconography of Zendikar. Out of the 5 sets that have taken place on the plane of Zendikar, 5 of them have a hedron as the set symbol. The first set on Zendikar, called Zendikar, had a set symbol which simply depicted one of these massive stone structures in its most banal state. The following set, Worldwake, showed a hedron starting to open up, like a folded paper fortune teller that is about to reveal which cute boy in your homeroom class you're going to marry. I'm not sure if everybody watching this video will be familiar with the concept of folded paper fortune tellers, but they were a very hot commodity when I was in grade school, and are essentially a tarot card crab rangoon. The third set in original Zendikar block, Rise of the Eldrazi, which features our card this week, has a set symbol depicting a hedron which is cracked wide open, like a chocolate orange. Battle for Zendikar features a broken hedron. Oath of the Gatewatch features some, just like pieces of a hedron maybe? Some hedron bits. And the recently released Zendikar Rising has a set symbol which depicts a skyclave, but just looks like another hedron to me. The word hedron is an actual suffix, although not really a standalone term. The prefix poly means multiple, like polymorph, which means having multiple forms, or polyraptor, which means having multiple raptors. When you were a child and you attended learning school, you might have been taught about polygons and polyhedrons. A polygon is a shape with multiple angles, like a triangle, and a polyhedron is a 3-dimensional shape with multiple faces, like a tetrahedron. A tetrahedron is made out of 4 triangles. The 5 most fundamental polyhedrons are called platonic solids, named after Plato. The smallest of these is the tetrahedron, which you dungeon masters out there might know as a D4. The largest platonic solid is the icosahedron, also known as a D20, or a spin-down life counter if you're playing Magic the Gathering. Although if you're a serious competitive player, you'll probably use a piece of paper and a pencil instead of a dice. The penultimate platonic solid is the dodecahedron, which has 12 faces, just like how the card Dodecapod shows a creature with 12 limbs, and how a D12 has 12 Ds. Neato. The pivotal, central platonic solid is the octahedron, with octo faces, and here is where we find the hedrons of Zendikar. At some point, the residents dropped the octo and just started calling them hedrons, but most of them are quite octo. If you wanted to build a diorama of Zendikar, you could achieve this by simply painting a bunch of 8-sided dice, and on the information superhighway, you can easily find, purchase, and then roll a wide array of hedron-looking D8s that commemorate this geometric connection. The last remaining platonic solid is the cube, which should be called a hexahedron, but isn't, because our world is built upon millions of wafer-thin membranes of abject meaninglessness and irreconcilable ineptitude. There do also appear to be some notable hedrons, which more closely resemble stellated dodecahedrons, which isn't a platonic solid, but instead a Kepler-Poinsot polyhedron. But let's not spend too much time talking about geometry, otherwise we might end up attracting geeks and nerds to this otherwise very cool Magic the Gathering YouTube show. If you ever see a basic land card and it's chocked full of big stone octahedrons, you're on Zendikar, baby. These megastructures were created by Nahiri, who is a core native to the plane of Zendikar. I could explain what core are, but I assume you're looking at a picture of Nahiri right now, and that pretty much tells you everything you need to know about them. Nahiri used her stone magic, or lithomancy, to craft the hedrons and create one giant prison for the Eldrazi, kind of like making a circle of salt around a slug to prevent it from escaping your garden to wreak untold havoc and destruction across the multiverse. When some random dinguses decided to fuss with this salt circle, the slugs escaped, and the garden vegetables that are the many planes of magic were once again at the mercy of these insatiable beings. It's from this prison that the Eldrazi did rise in Rise of the Eldrazi. These three colorless extra-dimensional tentacle beings wasted no time in laying waste to the lush adventure world of Zendikar. Due to a great coincidence, there just happened to be some heroes on Zendikar at the time when the Eldrazi were released. They whipped out their Motorola sidekicks and called up their strongest friends to come and help. And among them is a fellow named Gideon Jura. Gideon is a planeswalker who hails from the Greek-inspired plane of Theros and fights armed with a set of whip-like arm blades, which are very weird but seldom discussed. I feel like people could talk about how weird they are more because they're very weird. Gideon also has the notable ability to make himself impervious, which is pretty handy when you live in a fictional world defined by violent conflict. Gideon was born as Kithian Iroha and had a rough and tumble childhood of lighthearted street brawling, gang affiliation, and Robin Hoodery, which landed him in jail. Once he got out of the slammer, he joined back up with his ragtag group of irregulars to do the bidding of the megalomaniacal. That's such a hard word. Why would I put... What kind of dum-dum puts the word megalomaniacal into a script and then expects themselves to be able to read it mid-sentence? Come on, Dusty, what are you doing? Once he got out of the slammer, he joined back up with his ragtag group of irregulars to do the bidding of the megalomaniacal sun god Heliod. In one such excursion, they were directed to battle a minion of Erebos, the god of death. And after succeeding, he was overcome with hubris and decided to take on this dark god himself. Erebos struck back, and Gideon survived because being unkillable is kind of his main talent. But unfortunately, all of his friends who stood around him had other talents, perhaps juggling or Tuvan throat singing. We cannot be sure, but we can be sure that those talents did not protect them from being horribly killed by the vengeful god of death. This is what caused Gideon's planeswalker spark to ignite, granting him the ability to traverse the multiple worlds of the magic multiverse. This incident defined Gideon in many ways, as protecting others would become his obsession, and the blame he felt for his friend's unnecessary demise would haunt him for the rest of his life. This obsession would drive Gideon in a way unlike any other character in Magic. Since their introduction, planeswalkers have been the main focus of the Magic story, even going back to old walkers like Urza. But in the modern era, these characters are very intentionally built upon the same premise of being empowered by a singular dramatic event. It's been said, and occasionally it has been shown, that the intense experience which causes these world-traversing comic book characters to attain their most defining abilities can be a pleasant occasion, but for the vast majority of these individuals, the happenstance which triggered their planeswalking skill is usually a horrific or tragic event. Gideon saw his friends die at his feet because of his own hands, with his own eyeballs. Other planeswalkers sparked because of psychological torment, or mortal danger, or accidentally turning your brother into a Frankenstein. For most of these characters, trying to deal with these realities defines them, their insecurities and their weaknesses, and also their redemption and achievements. You can chart most Planeswalker arcs as beginning with an emotionally scarring event, progressively showing how this event impacts their thought process and prevents them from achieving their full potential, as they slowly overcome their baggage and learn to escape the lingering pain of their inciting incident, and then finally resolving when they can demonstrate triumph over their internal demons. For some of these characters, they also have external demons. In this way, the Magic story is fixated on and revolves around stories of self-actualization, and the Magic universe is populated with super powerful wizards who all have deep-seated trauma. The way this alters the overall story is profound, and it's hard to have Planeswalkers interact on any level without them inadvertently leaning into each other's exposed psychic wounds. If you're a low-key person with an uneventful life in the worlds of Magic the Gathering, even if you have the incredibly rare latent spark that is just waiting to propel you onto a wild, plane-spanning journey, that spark will not ignite, and you will simply live out your days in quiet obscurity. Calm, mediating Planeswalkers are hard to come by, and while Gideon's trauma was as great as anybody's, he managed to exude stability and self-assurance. Perhaps Gideon maintained a stoic approach despite his turbulent past because his goal was always self-sacrifice, and he knew that by simply throwing himself into battle after battle, eventually his debt would be repaid. In case you weren't aware, spoiler alert, that happened in 2019, when after her own traumatic experience led the necromancer Liliana Vest to spend countless centuries hiding from her feelings of guilt by embracing selfish schemes to attain spooky powers, she made the monumental decision to surrender her own life for the benefit of others. A life she worked really hard to both extend and liberate from a pretty complicated four-way demon contract. In this moment, Liliana's arc was set to complete in a burst of CGI flames. But don't you dare try and die in front of Gideon Jura. In the existential equivalent of paying a stranger's parking ticket, he literally stole her narrative closure in a callback to days of youthful Robin Hoodery, and was greeted by his long-lost friends in what is essentially the cardboard equivalent of a short dream sequence. Since his hubris led to the unnecessary death of his childhood chums, Gideon's goal was basically this sacrifice, and it's this fatalist goal that likely gave him such a clear path through life. So when the plane is octahedronal and the monsters are spaghetti, Mr. Jura knows that it's time to get ready. That's potentially the dumbest thing I've ever written in my life. Card number 38 from Rise of the Eldrazi shows what happens when you pit an unkillable hunk against an unfathomable foe. Directly preceding near-death experience in Rise of the Eldrazi is Mammoth Umbra, an aura that encases any of your creatures in an elephant-sized spirit vessel. Following near-death experience in Rise of the Eldrazi is Nomad's Assembly, which is also a Magic card. Near-death experience is a very unique card that belongs to many exclusive Magic card subsets. Firstly, you might have noticed that the first two words of this card's name are hyphenated. Hyphens are not unheard of in Magic card names, and certainly aren't as rare as exclamation points, but still only comprise about 3% of Magic cards. It's important to be clear that we're talking about a hyphen here, which connects two words, and not a dash, which separates two words. There are no Magic cards with a dash in their name, although there are 4 cards with the word dash in their name, and one of them has a hyphen. Among silver bordered joke cards, all kinds of punctuation is much more common, including one card that has an underline as its entire name, one card that has a question mark, and the card Bingo, which has not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 hyphens. Speaking of Bingo, near-death experience doesn't cross anything off our Magic card criteria bingo sheet. Technically, this card was reprinted as a mythic, and would therefore be the first mythic card we've discussed. But that printing was from a From the Vault product, where literally every card had a mythic rarity symbol, and there was no actual rarity involved, since you got all 15 cards contained in the product when you purchased the product. From the Vault lore, released in 2016, contained shiny foil reprints of cards that represented pivotal moments from the Magic story. Considering how much I've already rambled about Gideon Jura's story arc, that much should come across as no surprise. From the Vault lore was the second to last From the Vault set, and like all of these premium products, it has a somewhat odd set symbol depicting a rook being rolled up into a scroll. This might be the best From the Vault set symbol, but overall they all feel a bit off-brand. It's hard to say if a card is truly a mythic rare card if it doesn't appear in a Magic booster pack at that rarity, and it would be difficult to determine whether this counts as a mythic for the purpose of the incredibly important bingo sheet. But luckily, I forgot to include mythic rarity as a square on the bingo sheet, so we can just ignore this ambiguity, move on, and get back to more important topics words, like punctuation. According to Scryfall, both the card Latnam's Legacy and Legions of Lim-Dûl contain an equals sign in their Japanese language printings from the somewhat obscure Cold Snap theme deck. But this equals sign is actually known as a double hyphen and is used in the place of a normal hyphen when translating names that have hyphens into Japanese. This avoids confusion with the symbol known as chunpu, also known as chunkigo, onbiki, or bobiki, which designates a long vowel sound in Japanese. It might seem odd that this double hyphen only appears on 2 cards, given the number of Magic cards with hyphens, and looking at other Japanese language cards, it seems like it is actually more common than is reflected in the search results. But after staring at this Japanese version of near-death experience for 5 minutes, I think I'm ready to move on with my life. Some of you more observant and eagle-eyed fans might be wondering why I just spent 5 minutes discussing hyphens when we already discussed a card with a hyphen in its name in episode number 4, and I didn't even mention it once during that entire video. The answer is quite simple. I have no idea. I don't plan out these videos. I just pour my ceaseless mind thoughts into a word processor and hope it comes out as a compelling examination of language, geometry, flags, and cardboard. The second subcategory of gaming rectangles that near-death experience belongs to is those of great devotion. Devotion is a mechanic that cares about the colored mana symbols present in a card's casting cost. 3 is generally seen as a high devotion cost, and in all of Magic there are only 62 cards with 3 or more white pips. The term pip is often used among Magic players to specify the mana symbols on a given card, and can be compared to the pips on an officer's collar, or those present on both dominoes and dice. The term pip comes from Pippin, an old term for apple seeds, and there is also a musical called Pippin, which I chose to deliberately do absolutely no research about, because I used to work in the musical theater industry, and I'm still progressing through my character arc to recover from that trauma. There is also a character in The Lord of the Rings named Pippin, but apparently, according to the internet, that's just a nickname, and his real name is Peregrine Took. If anybody has a time machine, I would appreciate it if you would go back in time and ask J.R.R. Tolkien what his frickin' deal was. There is only one white card that possesses the ultra rare quad pips. Although if you consider hybrid cards to count, which you probably should, then there are actually quite a few more. I'm not going to list them all, but you can look at the pictures of them and read the names yourselves. Wow, look at all those pips. I hope you're enjoying looking at these cards on the screen. I certainly am. Wow, look at all those cards. It's fun looking at cards together. Pips can also be referred to as pops, daubs, dots, spots, blips, blots, blotches, splotches, splashes, specks, or flecks. So the next time you're holding a hexahedral dice, make sure to stop and admire the flecks. The final category which near-death experience falls into is a mechanical one, known as alternate win conditions. As previously discussed on this channel, and just kind of obvious on a fundamental level to anybody who has ever played Magic the Gathering, you generally lose the game when your life points reach 0. There are, however, some cards which provide an alternate path to victory, through poisoning your opponent, or aligning some of those hedrons, or touching them with a spooky lady. I've mentioned these exact examples before, but I can't remember when or why. Except for the very concept of alternate win conditions, which might seem radical, the function of near-death experience is actually incredibly simple. It does absolutely nothing, unless you happen to be at 1 life, in which case it will win you the game. The doing nothing part is definitely a bit of a downside, and 5 mana is a lot when you consider that Darksteel Relic, which we've also mentioned before, does absolutely nothing for only 0 mana. The card Null Rod famously does nothing, except for literally, just in a poetic sense. There are of course cards that reward you for simply casting an enchantment, or having them on the battlefield, or for having so much devotion. With Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, you can pay 2 and tap it to generate an amount of mana equal to your devotion to a given color. If you have 4 copies of Near-Death Experience out, that means that with just Nykthos and 2 other lands, you can generate 12 mana. That almost sounds good. Within the small group of cards which cause you to win the game through alternate means, Near-Death Experience can be compared very simply to an even smaller subset of permanents that trigger at the beginning of your upkeep, often enchantments. There is a good reason to make an alternate win condition this way, as having to wait until the beginning of your next turn allows your opponent a window to do something to stop it. If you are at 1 life and you spend your entire turn casting a 5 mana enchantment that doesn't do anything, it's a bit risky considering how many ways ways your opponent could have to do 1 measly damage to you. This means that it's likely a better idea to have a card yourself, which will allow you to quickly lower your life right as your turn is about to start, to put yourself into this precarious but victorious position. Cards with Phyrexian mana allow you to pay life instead of regular mana, so a card like Spellskite, is that the right one, Spellskite? I think that is. Will very conveniently let you dump all of your precious life points like proverbial bathwater. Unfortunately, Phyrexian mana only works in increments of 2, so you would already need to be at an odd life total. There are actually a lot of cards that let you pay life whenever you want to, and a lot of them only work in increments of 2. Soul Drinker, Treasonous Ogre, Nightmare Lash, Unspeakable Symbol, and our old friend Anavolver, when kicked with a black mana, work in an even more inconvenient increment of 3. Adonto Vanguard, Marrow Bats, Underrealm Lich, and Aetherstorm let you pay 4 life, and Volrath's Dungeon will let you pay a whopping 5 life to do something, which I cannot recall, and I do not have a picture of the card in front of me as I'm recording this. Lurking Evil lets you pay half of your life rounded up, which will eventually, inevitably, lead you to 1 life. Luckily, there are actually quite a few cards that will allow you to drain out your lifeblood in singular increments, giving you a maximum amount of control over your dwindling vitality. As is the case with many things, it's easier to tear your life total down than to build it up. Test of Endurance is another white alternate win condition enchantment that activates at the beginning of your turn, but instead of 1 life, it requires you to have 50 or more life. In a normal game of Magic the Gathering, where you start at 20 life, or even in EDH where you start at 40 life, getting to 50 life is a little bit of a hassle. Felidar Sovereign is a big kitty cat and only asks you to get to 40 life, which is literally where you start in EDH. But as your opponents are likely to make your life total decrease as the game progresses, and the kitty cat costs 6 mana, it is most likely that you won't still be at 40 life by the time you can play it. It has lifelink though, so it can gain you some of that life back, but why swim upstream when you can float downstream in an inner tube while sipping a mojito? Your opponents are most likely not playing an alternative win condition in their decks, so you can count on them actively trying to get your life total to 0. They're doing the work for you. All you need to do is get the near-death experience out there and wait. Of course, it's possible your opponents will overshoot, but if you've got a card like Angel's Grace, you can pull the emergency brake and achieve the mortality equivalent of a perfectly placed shuffleboard puck. Feel free to replace this shuffleboard reference with a curling reference at your own discretion. Shuffleboard and curling are basically the same sport at different temperatures. If you don't have an Angel's Grace, you can also use an Angel of Grace, or Sustaining Spirit, or Worship, or Sarah, a planeswalker who can give you an emblem which recreates the exact same effect as Worship, or Stunning Reversal, or Fortune Thief, or Ollie from Cairo, who looks very sad despite having a very cool necklace. If you want to, you can make a deck all about alternate win conditions. There are a lot of fun alternate win conditions, which activate when you have a lot of creatures, or a lot of one creature, or a lot of dead creatures, or a lot of coin flips, or a lot of artifacts, or a lot of one specific artifact, or a lot of one specific artifact token, or a lot of terrible lands, or a ton of cards in your deck, or no cards in your deck, or no cards in your deck, or no cards in your deck again, or when you have nothing left at all, or when you have nothing left at all but in kind of a funny way. There's also Azor's Elecutors, a card which you can learn all about by listening to episode 229 of the podcast Allied Strategies, the show which directly inspired this very YouTube channel. If you really want to win the game with a near-death experience, it will help if you can sneak it out at the last moment, rather than letting your opponents have a full turn cycle to take care of it. That's where cards like Leyline of Anticipation or Academy Rector come in. You can sacrifice Academy Rector at the end of your opponent's turn and surprise everybody with a nail-biting victory. In Draft, this card is what is known as completely unplayable, as the circumstances for it to do anything are so incredibly hard to engineer that you'll only ever pull it off once in your lifetime. And the story will be worth it, despite the wasted time and money. Cards like this are much more playable in constructed formats, where you can assemble the hyper-specific puzzle pieces needed to make the card effective, but this puzzle might be missing a few pieces, as Near-Death Experience hasn't won many major tournaments, or minor tournaments, or even shown up at all. In most of these videos, I cross my fingers that the joke format EDH will provide a happy home for whatever oddball card we're discussing, and that sentiment exists here in full force. I'm actually kind of surprised that this card only shows up in 578 decks on the deck tracking site EDHREC, because in multiplayer formats, you have both more time to assemble strange win conditions, and also more win percentage to gain by pursuing them. Test of Endurance appears in almost 2,000 decks, and Felidar Sovereign appears in a whopping 8,400 decks. Approach of the Second Sun is in almost 12,000 decks. Laboratory Maniac, or Laboratory Maniac, holds the record for the most played alternate win condition card in EDH, showing up in over 23,000 decks. Although Jace and Thassa's Oracle are quickly catching up. They really gotta stop printing these cards. The flavor text on Near-Death Experience discusses the concept of victory, and the way that word can feel inadequate when discussing the outcome of any battle. Victory sounds exuberant, but seeing destruction, mayhem, and death inspires little exuberance in good-hearted folks like Gideon Jura. The artwork depicts this hunky hero standing in the noodly aftermath of a knockdown, drag-out, head-to-head to lack of a head throwdown. Around him lie the remains of the portions of the 3 Eldrazi which were most closely involved in this specific battle. That sentence is very confusing, and I think that's appropriate given the nature of Eldrazi. This scene is important enough to be used as a thumbnail for a story article on the Magic website. It's featured repeatedly when discussing the plot, and by expertly clicking on the bright blue hyperlinks that are found within the labyrinth of backlogged fantasy fiction on the Magic the Gathering website, I'm able to discern that the artwork on Near-Death Experience depicts the weary end of the Battle of Fort Kef. In this battle, the invincible Gideon tried to fist fight an ageless being beyond reason, and shockingly found his martial capabilities inadequate for the task. In the background, you can clearly see the mushroom-like shape of Emrakul, the biggest and most bannable of the 3 Eldrazi. The illustration here is by Dan Scott, who has done 267 illustrations for Magic the Gathering, including some iconic cards like Ponder, but for some reason not Ponder Mage. This artwork for Serum Visions, which people like to make fun of, Solemn Simulacrum, the Goblin Pope, Helix Pinnacle, which is another alternate win condition, Nova Chaser, which reminds me of this angry kid meme, and Sickening Shoal, which depicts flying goldfish vomiting on a man. I would describe his style as being quintessentially Magic the Gathering, and he often depicts central characters within a scene, opting for a clear depiction and a singular focus. This all applies to Near-Death Experience, with Gideon being the obvious nucleus of the painting, and the rest of the elements acting to support and inform what he is going through. The pose that Gideon holds is meant to communicate that he is exhausted, slouching and bloodied, with an agonizing look upon his face. The carpet of corpses at his feet helps relay the sheer volume of his enemies, and other than the singular geometric monolith behind him, there is nothing else to see but piles of purple, red, and blue bodies fading into the hazy distance. I really enjoy the single lifeless arm sticking out of the carnage, and the crepuscular rays descending from the Zendikar sky impart this scene with a sense of religious salvation and tranquility. Dan Scott works digitally, and his pieces bear the textural hallmarks of this medium. The sky is blotted in loosely with impressionist daubs of warm hues, reminiscent of a Turner painting. The closer figures are more clearly defined, and I love the way Scott has rendered the helmet face of the most central Eldrazi spawn. The viewpoint here is very low, as if we are lying among the dead, and the strong Dutch angle helps undermine the serenity and reinforce the notion that this is a calm moment among many stressful ones. Overall, this painting does not contain much subtlety, and that's for good reason, as this moment is meant to be clear and obvious, as any climactic scene should be. If this painting contained opaque hints at what was happening, then one of the most crucial moments of this primary plotline could have been lost upon many players. This is the sort of piece that ends up in articles, and thumbnails, and on playmats, which Dan Scott will be happy to sign or alter for you if you ever find him at a Magic tournament. Despite the very direct intent of this painting though, and its easily discernible place within the story of Zendikar, I'm not actually sure that the name is entirely fitting though, at least not in the way that you might expect. While I understand the notion that Gideon is pushed to his physical brink, trying to take down this horde of Eldrazi, it seems strange to lament the near death of somebody whose life purpose is to die in defense of others. The pained expression that Gideon bears is not just physical, but emotional anguish, and I think that the real reason he is clenching his fist in anger is because he knows that he almost failed, and that it was Zendikar which almost died on this day. A near-death experience is what causes many planeswalkers to ignite their spark and unlock their weirdly specific suite of powers. But for Gideon, the trauma which launched his story arc was not merely dying, but surviving. The death of his friends was solely his fault, and yet he was the one who was not slain. A near-death experience can be a life-changing occurrence, and many accounts of these events take on a great importance to those who have witnessed them. For many people, a near-death experience allows them to fully realize how much they want to live and how precious their time truly is. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but what cannot kill you offers little room for growth. Therefore, near-death experience doesn't show Gideon coming near death, but rather having a death-adjacent experience. Gideon knew his story arc. He is the one who caused his own trauma, and he is the one who will resolve it. The story of Gideon Jura contains no near-death experiences. The story of Gideon Jura is a near-life experience. The tragedy of his character is not his 2019 death, but that in his endless compassion for others and his inability to ever consider forgiving himself. His inevitable sacrifice was set in motion from the very day he caused the death of his friends. While almost a prototypical hero character, I don't know if Gideon Jura should be held up as any sort of example. Caring about your friends is important, but it's also important to care about yourself and learn to forgive yourself for getting your friends killed by hubristically trying to challenge the god of death. Therefore, the true tragedy of Gideon Jura isn't that he died. The tragedy of Gideon Jura is that he simply couldn't get busy living. So he had to get busy dying. And his story arc probably wouldn't have been very interesting if it wasn't for the fact that he was really, really bad at dying. And then here at the end, I'm going to have a picture of I'll have a picture of the card Rest in Peace. Hello there, friends. That is the end of episode number 8. I hope you enjoyed it. I think for a while I'm going to stick to a bi-weekly schedule. I did also publish my Patreon page. I still feel a little bit torn about the issue of Patreon. I don't personally feel like I need your money. And really, ultimately, the thing that makes me want to engage with people on Patreon is the fact that you have to have 1,000 subscribers on YouTube in order to make community posts. If I had 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, I legitimately probably would never have thought about making a Patreon page. I just want to be able to post little updates and stupid stuff, maybe some production notes. And until I have 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, I cannot do that. So if you could get your 665 best friends to become a subscriber to my YouTube channel so I could post community updates, that would be neato. Anyways, I hope you're doing alright. I hope you're having a pretty good 2021 so far. As always, let me know in the comments if you've ever won a game with near-death experience, or if you've ever lost a game to near-death experience, or if you've ever had a personal near-death experience. As with most of these videos, amongst all the stupid jokes, there is a little bit of a heartfelt message, and I hope that if you've experienced any trauma in your life, you can see the experience of growing through that as being worthwhile. You can recognize that it is not a sign that you are damaged, but that you have experiences worth sharing with the world. And while it can be hard to come to terms with what's happened in the past, just remember that you have a future, and it's gonna be pretty okay. And in that future will be more episodes of A Magic Card.